My fiancé is having an affair with a dead woman? Here's my dilemma: do I postpone my wedding and give us a shot to work this out, or do I run for the hills? I'm wondering if I'm completely missing his perspective on all of this. My fiancé and I have been together for 9-ish years. A year or two through our relationship we spent some time apart as I felt he had an inappropriate relationship with a coworker, both realtors. We ended up getting back together, but he continued to sleep with her during the first few months of us trying to work things out. We did work things out. The infidelity isn't as big of an issue for me as it is for other people. I quickly felt trust with him again and things were great. The issue of the affair has rarely come up since we talked through our resolution years ago. 6-ish years later we got engaged. Almost a year after that, his mistress died. Excuse my cold tone with this, but to me she is not a good person and I will never see her in that light. I found out she had a fetish for taken men and she played a big role in the end of 4 others' marriages. My fiancé went to the funeral and spoke, at her parents' request, despite my expressing how hurtful and disrespectful that was in my eyes. In the months following her death he has participated in fundraising held in honor of this woman. I have continued to express how hurtful and disrespectful I find his involvement in all of this. I'm capable of, and have, moving on and forgiving him for the original affair, but when he keeps doing things that bring it to the forefront of our relationship I can't help but to feel hurt by it. There is a messy history after all. I feel like I have sacrificed so much, sat back and been the one to bend and compromise on everything surrounding her in these situations, and I can't see anything that he's compromised on when it comes to it. All I see is an inappropriate and disrespectful emotional connection to his dead mistress. There was a small fundraising dinner in her honor the other night and this is where things really hit the fan. I again expressed my feelings on the situation, especially since he didn't tell me until an hour before he was going to leave to attend. He said I need to get over the affair and stop holding it over his head and I need to figure my stuff out. He wishes I could see his perspective because I wouldn't be upset if I stepped back and saw his side of things, yet, he couldn't articulate his perspective. He also said he was sick of my meritless threats after I said if he is going to continue to have an inappropriate emotional connection with his dead mistress, and bring it to the forefront of our lives together, that I couldn't live the rest of my life like that. He said he has the right to honor a good friend and that she always had his back even after he chose me. This has really caught me off guard the past year. I thought there was no connection to her anymore. I also thought I had a partner that would care enough about my feelings to be willing to change some of their actions. I know I would feel awful if he came to me and said that something I was doing was hurtful to him and he found it disrespectful. I'm getting none of that from him. My girlfriend found out I was taking one for the team when we first met. It's ruined my relationship. About 2 years ago I was at a party with a friend of mine who we'll call Joshua. Me and Josh were just vibing to the music and chilling when he suddenly spots 2 girls. The one he was interested in was this pretty blonde while the other was her heavier friend. That's not to say her friend was unattractive, but just a little noticeably bigger than what could be considered average weight. Anyway, Josh turned to me and urged me to be his wingman by taking one for the team and distracting her friend while he chatted with the blonde. After a little back and forth, I decided to just do it to be a good friend. So we made our way over and made our move, where I would go in first and start chatting with the friend while Josh began flirting with the girl he was interested in. Again, this friend I was talking to was by no means unattractive, just a bit heavier than what most guys, myself included at the time, would go for. I thought she was very sweet, even though I was just talking to her out of obligation. It didn't really matter anyway, cause ultimately the girl Josh was into already had a boyfriend apparently and had seemingly brushed him off, with him eventually patting me on the back to signify I didn't have to chat with her friend anymore. So I decided to politely end the conversation, however, not before she asked for my Instagram, which I decided to give her. I didn't really think much of it at the time, and I was certain I would never see her again. However, a couple days later I ran into the same girl in my school's campus store. I didn't really recognize her at first, but she seemed to know me immediately. We decided to chat for a bit, and I was reminded of her name, Megan, not her real name. Anyway, it was really just small talk until Megan suddenly seemed a little awkward. I asked her if everything was alright and she replied that nothing was wrong, but she wanted to know if I wanted to go out with her sometime. This actually came as a shock to me as it was the first time a girl had ever made the first move and asked me out. So, even though she wasn't really my type at the time, I said yes. And that was probably the best decision of my life. Me and Megan really hit it off, and before long we were in a serious relationship. Any qualms I had about her weight were gone immediately after the first time we had sex, as I actually found her body to be really soft and comforting. I had never felt so relaxed cuddling with someone before I met her. We've been dating for 2 years now and I absolutely love her. She's my everything, and I have even been thinking of proposing as soon as we are both done with school. Everything was perfect, until last month. Last month, we hosted a small get-together just for a few friends who are also in relationships, like a couple's game night sort of thing. It was here where Josh, who has been my good friend for years now, was pretty drunk, and made a joke about how if he had never forced me to take one for the team back then I would have never found the love of my life. The joke didn't really register to me as anything negative, and I was also drunk, so I just laughed it off. Megan was cuddled up next to me on the couch though, and asked what Josh meant by that. I told her nothing, but Josh, being the drunk idiot that he was, elaborated and told her the story about how we met through my perspective at the time. Megan just said oh, and didn't really react, so I figured she just brushed it off. However, the rest of the night she seemed kind of distant and even a little sad. Finally, once everyone had left, she let it all out and started crying. She was essentially in shock because this whole time she thought I approached her because I was interested in her, and learning it because I was forced to seem to bring back old insecurity within her. It doesn't help that she's actually gained weight since back then, even though I don't really have any problem with that and I've told her that multiple times. I immediately gave her the full story about how I fell for her right after that, and I have loved and adored her ever since. She seemed reassured and we even cuddled the whole night after that. Since that night though, she's been acting differently. It's like she's lost her confidence around me. She only wears large, baggy clothing even though she used to never before. She refuses to change with me in the room and hardly eats in front of me. Before, I used to playfully tickle her stomach sometimes and she'd always smile and play along. Now she seems insecure when I so much as accidentally graze it. She also refuses to have sex without a shirt on. So far I sat her down multiple times and explained that her body is incredibly attractive to me and there's no one more beautiful in my eyes than her. But it's like she doesn't believe me. Lately I've been thinking about offering her to come to the gym with me, but I'm scared she may be more insecure at that suggestion. It has ruined our relationship in ways that hurt me. The little cute quirks about her that she used to do is something of the past. Here insecurity has swallowed her whole and she doesn't even act the same anymore. She doesn't act like the woman I love. How do I get her to believe that I love her no matter what she looks like? That I truly adore her in all aspects? I just want her to be confident in herself again. What horrible thing did your significant other do that ended it all? So I have been together with my girlfriend for almost 8 years. Our relationship was kinda rocky since I usually have to go on business trips to different countries once in a while, and she's admitted she hates it since she's paranoid that I might be cheating on her. She's gotten cheated before in the past. I, of course, reassured many times that I wasn't. Even to the point I was not drinking while on my trips, trying my best to avoid other female interaction, even calling, texting her anytime I was immediately free to text. She's also pregnant, which I assume made her paranoia worse. Sometimes I'd even wake up to her calling me crying on the phone cause I didn't answer her texts within a minute. I still once again, did everything to clear her suspicions about me, which made me kinda depressed knowing that she doesn't trust me fully enough. Last Tuesday, I came back home early from my trip to surprise her, even buying a big patch of flowers and tickets to a movie she'd been dying to see for a couple months, as well as buying her a ring since I've been wanting to pop the question for a while now. When I arrived back home I saw a car that I wasn't familiar with parked in the driveway. I assumed it was her friend's car since one of them got her license 9 months ago. As I opened the door to the house I heard music blasting from our bedroom. I thought this was a bit strange since she doesn't like loud noises. As I came upstairs and entered the bedroom, I saw something I thought I'd never seen in a million years. My girlfriend was riding some guy that I'd never seen before in my life. I'm not gonna go into details about what I did, but the guy ended up leaving the house after 15 or 20 minutes. Afterwards me and my girlfriend had a shouting match. She was accusing me of all sorts of things, like how I was never around much, I rarely took her on dates anymore, and that I was probably cheating on her while on my business trips. Which is a fucking lie considering I've always took her out somewhere when I came back from work even when I was tired as shit, and her accusing me of cheating was a fucking lie because I always showed her that I wasn't, even gave her all my social media's password because I fucking loved her. I don't know why, but I just snapped. I packed all her belongings and threw them out into the cold rainy street, where she started screaming at me even more for doing that. My head was hurting from the amount of anger that built up, and her screaming in my ear didn't help. Now I don't condone what I did and I of course regret it, but I just grabbed her and threw her out into the street, where I screamed at her to not come back because the locks would be changed. I slammed the door and called off work for 2 weeks due to a family emergency. Did I do the wrong thing? I just can't find it in my heart to forgive her at all, even though she is carrying my child. I finally got my revenge on my creepy stepfather after 15 years in the making. My ex-stepfather, I refuse to acknowledge that he married my mother, and since my mother is deceased, I shouldn't have to anymore, is an awful man. My mother married him because she thought I needed a man in my life to help raise me. He was abusive verbally, and was just a toxic person to be around. Even when my mother and he divorced, he still insisted on trying to see me, and I had to be forced to go see him and his new wife every other weekend. When I moved away from the city he was in, due to me ending up in foster care, I didn't bother looking him up, nor trying to find out if he was even still alive. So, when I moved back in 2008, I was kinda surprised to find out he was still alive. Sorry for this lead up, but this is where the foundation of this revenge takes place. When I moved back to the city, I had worked my arse off and bought myself my first car, a 1992 Buick Regal Custom. I loved that car, and I also loved helping people out, which was easier with a car. Well, my ex-stepdad knew about the car, because he had seen me driving around town, running errands for the local homeless shelter where I volunteered, taking guys to the doctor's office when they didn't want to wait on a bus, stuff like that, and he was a resident at said shelter. Through my volunteer work at the shelter, I had befriended a couple of young guys who had landed on hard times, and were just working odd jobs to save up some money to move back to their hometown, the same town I had moved back to the city from. After hearing about this, and their plans to just get a Greyhound down there, I told them no, that I would actually drive them there for like $40 in gas, saving them about $250. We made arrangements, and set a date for their departure. Apparently, my ex-stepdad heard about this, so he cornered them in the shower that night, told them that he was gonna have his way with them, and that I would be expecting the same kind of payment when I got them to that town. When they refused, he threatened to kill them, so they finally accepted. When I pulled up to pick them up the next morning, I could tell the air was off, like something had happened. Yesterday, these two guys were eager to leave this city behind, and now, they treated my car as if it had lived vipers in the passenger seat. So, I asked them what was up. They told me they didn't know about leaving the city with me, and I assured them it would be fine, not knowing what my ex-stepdad had done the night prior. After a little coaxing, and me mentioning that the Greyhound doesn't even run to where they were trying to go, they loaded up my trunk, and off we went. I could feel the tension in the car, and it had become so thick, that you could slice through it using a hydrojet. After we crossed into the neighboring state, they asked me if I could just drop them off at a hotel, and they would try to find other accommodations down to where they were going. I said I wouldn't mind, but wanted to know what brought on the sudden change of plans. After a tearful choking up in the back seat, they told me what had transpired the night before with my ex-stepdad, and I saw red. Ooh, I absolutely despise this man. I wanted to, No, I needed to hurt him, but how? After assuring the two boys that they were going to be fine, and that I wasn't even about to put them through what he did, they finally allowed me to take them all the way to their town. I instructed them to file assault charges against him, and to make sure they submit DNA samples to the police, and they assured me they would. On the way back, I plotted my revenge against him, and that's when it dawned on me, my ex-stepdad was a registered offender for some stupid night when he was 16. He had told me before that he was caught urinating on an elementary school swing set as a youth, and had to register. That was the main reason I ended up in foster care to begin with, something about child endangerment, bureaucratic BS. I also know that he didn't register in our state for the last couple of years, because if he had, he would have been kicked out of the shelter he was staying in, since they do a 3 times a day, 7-day a week, community outreach meal for not only the residents, but those who needed a hot meal that day, which would also include children. So, on the way back, I had informed the Office of Admissions staff that they had an offender in their shelter, and if they didn't get him out, I would report the shelter to the police. They had one of those safe spot stickers designating the shelter as a safe space for kids. Did I forget to mention that this shelter also ran a youth summer camp, and had a youth correctional facility and the library right next to it? They took action almost immediately, but when they went to evict him, he was nowhere to be seen. He had taken off, not to be seen again. Or so I thought. You see, when he vanished from the shelter that day, he thought the safest place to hide out was in his hometown, 9 states away. A smarter person would have looked up what his registration entailed, and would have known that fleeing across state lines without informing law enforcement is a felony, and it doesn't just stop at the state one left, but carries over to every state between point of origin and destination. So, he had racked up 9+ felony charges against him, just for that little jaunt. Fast forward to about 3 months ago, I got a message from the two boys on Facebook, asking me for my new number. I give it to them, and am almost immediately put in touch with a county sheriff, who had a federal agent in his office, asking if I knew where my ex-stepdad was. As I was telling both gentlemen that I didn't have a clue, my Facebook pinged. It was my ex-stepdad's wife, telling me to give her husband a chance to reconcile. Gag. A quick look on her page revealed that they were together, living in my hometown, and what's more, seriously, future Darwin Award winners here, they were living next door to the school he was caught urinating on all those years ago. I relayed that information to both gentlemen, and asked them what charges they had on him. They said they had 2 counts of statutory on him, and 3 counts of felony evasion. I mentioned his failure to register, and the day he left my hometown, he had run to his hometown, 9 states away. The county sheriff informed me that he was calling from that county, and he wasn't aware of the failure to register charges, but thanked me for informing him. Ladies and gentlemen, that dirtbag that nearly ruined my life, my trust with other people, and my reputation in my hometown was finally getting what is owed to him. 25 to life for everything, and isn't eligible for parole for another 17 years, if he lives that long. He is better off rotting in the depths of Tartarus, for the lives he ruined. What is an unbelievable coincidence that you've experienced? My mother-in-law, Sarah, is a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust in Europe. A Polish-born Jew, she's the only survivor of her entire nuclear and extended family. She and her husband Wolf, also a survivor, settled in Argentina after the war and lived a life that was anything but easy. 20 years ago, 50 years after the war, fearing that the Nazis were coming to get her, she sunk into a profound depression, a breakdown that transformed a delightful, attractive and very giving person into a helpless, tragic shadow of who she used to be, unable to take care of herself and totally dependent upon the loving care of her husband, Wolf. When my wife and I in Toronto, Canada got the unexpected call that her father was just days away from dying of lung cancer, a student of mine happened to be in my office to purchase something. She told my wife and me that her husband had recently died of lung cancer and asked if we would like the name of an organization that she found to be an extremely helpful source of information about lung cancer. We of course said yes, and she promised to call the next morning with a telephone number. My wife and I went home, spoke to family in Argentina, and that night booked her on the next flight to Buenos Aires in 2 days. The next morning, I called Immigration Canada to find what we needed to do to bring my mother-in-law into Canada after her husband passes on. I was mortified to speak with a classic bureaucrat who gave me the impression that it was going to be challenging and perhaps impossible to bring Sarah into Canada because of her mental condition. This was very disconcerting to say the least. Since my wife was an only child and had no one who could take care of her mother, the prospect was that my wife might have to stay in Argentina to look after her, perhaps for months or more, until we could sort out this situation. I was dejected when I hung up the phone, and before I could even reflect on the new complication in my life, I received a call from my student, Lois, with the telephone number of the lung cancer organization. I thanked her, and even before I had a chance to tell of my mother-in-law's plight, she asked me if I needed an immigration lawyer. I said that after my previous conversation minutes earlier with Immigration Canada, an immigration lawyer would probably be most useful. Lois was an editor at Canada's most respected newspaper and recommended Arnold, a friend and former journalist at the same paper who went on to become an immigration lawyer. She gave me Arnold's name and phone number, and I told her that I will call him as soon as I return from the Immigration Canada office. I had to go there and pick up an application form to start the immigration process for my mother-in-law. I hung up the phone, took the elevator down to the street which I crossed, and entered the nearby subway entrance. My mind was racing. My heart was aching. I was full of fear. I could feel my body tightening up as I ruminated on what we could do if Sarah was unable to get into Canada. When I got onto the train, I immediately started to meditate in order to quiet my emotions and clear my mind. I could feel the anxiety dissipating as I went deeper into meditation. In the distance, I heard the transit announcement name the station and heard people coming into the subway car. Then I heard a voice call my name and say stop meditating and say hello to me. I opened my eyes and saw Mary, an old acquaintance who was on a committee with me a decade earlier, and we started talking. Needless to say, I started telling her about how distraught I was in learning that I might not be able to bring my mother-in-law into Canada. We talked for a couple of subway stops when a stranger who was standing next to us excused himself and said that he couldn't help but overhear our conversation. He said that I shouldn't worry about being able to bring my mother-in-law into Canada because she would definitely be admitted on compassionate grounds. I asked him how he knew that, and he said that he was an immigration lawyer. I turned to my acquaintance and said what good fortune that an immigration lawyer should by chance hear our conversation on the subway and give me a free consultation that could instantly lower my anxiety. The lawyer then said that he was getting off at the next stop, and I thanked him for his generous advice and asked him for his business card. As he was getting off the train, he handed me his card through the door, and I discovered that it was none other than Arnold, the lawyer whose name was given to me by Lois not more than 20 minutes earlier. As the subway door was starting to close, I said, "Arnold, I just got your name from Lois." He said, "Are you Eli? Call me later this afternoon," and the subway pulled out of the station. I continued the trip to Immigration Canada without any fear. I now knew that things would work out. I had been given the sign that everything would be alright. I hired Arnold's legal services and, as he said, I had no trouble bringing Sarah into the country on compassionate grounds. But just consider what the odds might be that just minutes after Lois referred me to Arnold, that he should randomly be standing next to me in a busy subway car in the 5th largest city in North America, overhearing a conversation that would not have happened if an old acquaintance had not come upon me and rather rudely interrupted my meditation. What was the biggest scandal at your high school? I believe it was junior year of high school when a new girl came to school. She had evidently been in foster care for a while and had been adopted by a family whose son went to our school. She joined shortly thereafter. We will call her Aiden. She began hanging out with our friend group right away, which is how I met her. We were a giant group that was made up of a bunch of smaller subgroups, so I assumed one of the other subgroups had invited her in and everyone welcomed her. She had a very vivacious personality, she was funny, outgoing and generally liked to have fun. But there were definitely things she did that we found annoying at times. She could be a little too over the top, and she also seemed to assume a level of companionship that just wasn't there. She eventually started dating our friend, Joey. We thought they were a good match because both of them had outgoing personalities. However, it didn't take long for Aiden's behavior to become out of line and even to some level, kind of abusive. She could be mean to him, and that all came to a blowout during prom night where she essentially threw a massive fit and they broke up. If I remember correctly, I believe she actually attacked and scratched him right on the dance floor in front of several of our friends. Joey was very badly hurt by this and everyone was on his side. Her behavior had been a public spectacle, many of us had seen what happened and the rest of us were all filled in on the story. Basically, we rallied around helping and healing Joey. Aiden was no longer welcome to hang out with us. Aiden seemed to get the message pretty loud and clear. When she ran into me and my subgroup of friends, she approached us and asked, "Do you hate me too, like everyone else?" Since we tended to try and be nicer and drama-free, we told her we didn't hate her, told her we were sorry for what happened, but we still made no efforts beyond that. She knew that she had messed up and that we were not going to go out of our way to maintain any friendship. It didn't seem to affect her for long before she became close with her foster brother and started hanging out with his friends. We still believed she was crazy, but none of us minded the fact that she had moved on, except there were some whispers that the relationship between her and her foster brother seemed a little too close. Eventually, the two began full-blown dating to the shock and awe of much of the student body. They would post videos and photos of themselves at home, frolicking on the couch, kissing all over each other and lying on top of one another. Now, they weren't biological brothers and sisters. But there was still something a bit weird about a guy dating his sister. And according to them, their parents knew and were okay with it. So, their very outward acts of affection were broadcast frequently at school and at home, apparently with the knowledge of their parents. And then there came a day that changed it all. Allegedly, Aiden completely snapped while at home. The family not only had her brother/boyfriend, but they also had smaller children in the home as well. Aiden and her brother/boyfriend had been left home alone with the kids that night while their parents were out. I don't know specifically what started the issue, but as far as I'm aware, it was just that the younger kids had begun acting up and made Aiden angry. She broke into a massive screaming rage, grabbed a kitchen knife and allegedly chased the children around the house, screaming and threatening them with a knife. I'm not sure if the parents either got home right as it was happening or if they had just been home the entire time, but they saw it and had to stop her. They decided that they could not help Aiden with her problems and she was taken out of the home, which leads me to assume she really was a foster kid and not their officially adopted child, but I'm not sure. Her brother/boyfriend and her broke up and I believe he had witnessed the entire thing. He was completely devastated by what happened. Not only had he faced teasing about the fact that he was dating his sister, but now it turned out that she had attacked his family, been kicked out, and now he was left angry and heartbroken at the same time. He legitimately was extremely hurt by this event and he didn't necessarily have a lot of people to turn to. As for what happened to Aiden, she never came back to school after she was kicked out. It was immediate, she was there one day and gone the next. Our friend group did manage to track her down on social media, however, since many of us had been friends with her on Facebook, we monitored her activity. From what I know, I think she wound up with one other family for a short time, but she eventually ran away to go live with an older man/boyfriend. She lived emancipated at that point, jumping between 20-plus-year-old men, cheating on them and then moving to another. The next update we saw, she had gotten pregnant and had a baby. I witnessed the very classy photo of her, with her baby lying down on the bathroom counter, while she posed half naked in the mirror with a duck face, hashtagging that she is a hot mom or something to that effect. And a little while later, she had one baby, was pregnant with another and was still doing the hot mirror selfies. I don't know what became of her since then. I just feel bad for the children.